Okay, thank you very much, Joe, for joining us today, and for everyone else who is joining us now. And we will get an insight into how to get into sports journalism. I will share in a few moments a link to get subtitles from Otter, and I'll enable the subtitles also in Zoom. We'll be live on Facebook in a few moments, and you can share anything that you want to share about this masterclass on Twitter with the hashtag PressPadRemote. We'll be monitoring it, and we'll be live tweeting as well. So if you wanted to share some quotes or anything you enjoy, feel free. And you can also ask any questions you have for Joe in the box, or we'll also check social media for that. So who is Joe, and why did we ask him to do this today? So Joe, I met Joe when he was still a student in journalism, and he has been doing so well since. He has reported and written live text blogs on the Premier League, Women's Super League Championship, T20 Blast, Rugby Premiership, and other things that don't necessarily make too much sense to me because they are all sports, all sports championships, I guess. But over the last 4 years, he's covered everything. But even before that, he's also managed to do some very high-flying journalism, even from a distance. I have a very good memory of him and I working on a last-minute interview of Tour de France winner Vincenzo Nibali, just through text messages. And Nibali being Italian, me being French, and Joe being English. It was literally the most complicated interview you could have found. We also got moved by the BBC. I mean, it was all interesting, but we got there and it made for a very good interview. So I am very, very happy for Joe to be telling us now how he's made it into sports journalism. Am I allowed to say that? And to share with everyone the tips that he wishes he would have received when he was starting out. So over to you, Joe.
Okay, if I take over the screen sharing options, bear with me a second. There we go. So why is sports journalism a career you guys want to get into? Well, I mean, in my opinion, it's kind of the dream career that you can have. I'm somebody that's sports mad. There'll be loads of people watching this call that are also sports mad and would have spent their childhood growing up just sitting in front of the telly, trying to absorb as much sports as possible. And without being a professional sports person, being a sports journalist is kind of the best access you're going to get to these fantastic events and getting to experience them on the front line. So over the last couple of years, I've been to Wembley Stadium. That picture in the top left was taken 2 years ago when Salford City were promoted to League 2 by winning the National League playoff final. I'd studied at Salford University for 3 years. I'd lived in Salford for 4 years, and without it being the team I'd grown up with, I'd come to really support the team. So to be able to travel to Wembley for free to report on them was an amazing opportunity, getting to experience that, and just being around in the industry for these fantastic moments. So I reported on Liverpool winning 7-0, which is quite annoying as a Manchester United fan, but my friends were quite happy for me. And I've been doing live text blogs until 1:30 in the morning, or as Camille said, even before I was writing for the BBC, I was volunteering to write for a student paper, the National Student, and we'd somehow managed to get access to this amazing cyclist who rarely gave interviews, and in the space of a day, the three of us had to, Camille's editor, and myself had to somehow come up with some questions to ask him. And then we had to get a translator to ask those questions. And in the end, we somehow managed to get some really great lines out of him. He kind of admitted that as a child, like his father was fed up of him cycling so much that he took a hacksaw to his bike and basically said, if you want to be a cyclist, you've got to prove how much you love it by working hard. It was a very kind of weird parenting style, but it was good. It was a great story, and they're the kind of magical opportunities that you get in this industry. But it's a really difficult kind of part of journalism to get into. Journalism is a really hard way to make a career, but if you get there, there are so many brilliant opportunities that you can get, and it's just a case of knowing what you need to do to get to the those kind of levels. So that's what this talk is all about. There we go. So how do I get started? So there's a couple of things that you'll really need to have to make it in sports journalism. The first one's really obvious. It's a passion for sport. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to like every single sport that exists. I absolutely hate horse racing. I don't really understand it. And yet I freelance for an organization called The Sporting Life that specializes in horse racing. But thankfully they do other sports, and that's what they have me in for. But I think the main thing is to kind of isolate and understand why you want this so much, because there will be times when the going gets tough and you have to kind of look back and kind of source out your own motivations and remind yourself why you want it. You'll need ambition to kind of drive yourself and to keep pushing, and when you get rejections, you need to keep on digging and keeping on carrying on. Ideas. People are always after ideas, and you need to show why you're so valuable to the next editor that you talk to or the next newspaper that you email. And you need to come with ideas, because they won't do everything for you. You need a basic knowledge of sport. Lots of people think that you need to have at least some kind of football knowledge. Thankfully, there's more diverse kind of opportunities out there. You can kind of get away with not being that strong on football if you're really good on other sports. If you're really good at tennis, there's opportunities out there. And then after that, you just need to start practicing. So whether that's writing or reading more, but we're going to get into that in a bit. And then the final thing is to be yourself. We've really moved away in the industry from that kind of neutral voice. If you guys remember 10 years ago, if you'd ever listened to a radio station, all the kind of radio journalists just sounded the same. Whereas nowadays you've got some real kind of personalities. If you listen to Radio 1, it's kind of like having a conversation with your mate, rather than that like generic DJ at a wedding voice. And I think that's the same across journalism. People want real people to tell them what's going on, not just kind of a stereotype or a caricature. So whenever you can, just insert your own personality into everything that you do, because that's what makes you you, and that's what makes you unique. So how do you start then? Well, I'm just going to assume that everybody's on the kind of same platform right at the very start, when you're just starting out. So imagine you've never written any kind of journalism before, whether it's sport or just any journalism, no student paper, nothing like that. But what you have done is you've read a lot of journalism and you've watched a lot of sport, and you know that this is what you want to do. So this is an example if you want it to be a sports writer, but it's very easy to change this into audio or video, if that's the avenue you want to go into. So what I always recommend somebody to do is to pick the sport that they want, type it into Google, so type in football, and then the sentence "right for us." And if you search that into Google, you will get page after page after page of kind of volunteer blog sites that have been set up that want to give a platform to young people. So I've just picked an example purely because I know the editor that runs it and I know he's really nice. So this is the Chelsea Social. It's a blog written by Chelsea fans for Chelsea fans, and it's got some brilliant access. They've had interviews with some of the best Chelsea players out there, and Chelsea are a club that just won the Champions League, and their women's team have just been in a Champions League final. So some real superstars, and the Chelsea Social have access to them, which is fantastic. And if I was a Chelsea fan that was just starting out and I came across this blog, I would absolutely drop them a line and say, I'm really, really passionate and I want to work for you guys. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to pitch some great ideas when you talk to people. So don't just say, I really want to write for you. Come with a couple of ideas, whether it's a profile on Kante or whether it's something from a team's history, just start to be proactive a little bit. And then once you've got access from these different blog sites and you get some great experience and you get a couple of articles written up, you're starting to build yourself a portfolio. And what you'll notice is that when you kind of ask for work, whether it's on an official job application or it's just making unofficial inquiries via email, people always want to see examples of what you're doing. And that's not specific to sport journalism, that is a journalism thing. So if you can provide 3 to 5 really good stories that you're really proud of and you go, right, this showcases my best work, then you're in a really strong position. And these kind of voluntary blog things are a great way to start. And you're kind of allowed to make mistakes because nobody's being paid. So you're not held to the kind of same really high standards that you would be at a place like the BBC or a newspaper. And you'll also be able to see yourself develop. My first article isn't as good as my most recent one, just because everybody improves over time. And then that final line is don't get stuck working for free. You may have to do a bit of work for free to build up your portfolio, but if you're not getting paid, it's very, very easy to feel like you owe somebody something and you end up writing a bit too much. Instead, lots of things you can do is kind of ask for exposure, ask for them to tweet out your Twitter account so you feel like you're getting value for your time. But yeah, we'll come on to how to make the next step and that big jump upwards a bit later. And then, of course, if you can't find a platform, you can always create a platform for yourself. So on the left, I really wanted to make a YouTube video because I'd watched all those kind of educational channels on YouTube, and I was like, well, why can't I just do this for football? And it was kind of just a creative vanity project for me on one of my favorite seasons in English football's history. And nobody was ever going to commission a 32-minute video with crazy wide zooms and animation and really random things. But I wanted to do a long form project that was really creative, and I wanted to be able to show it to people. So when I had an application and they wanted an example of somewhere where I've really gone outside the box, I had a great half an hour video to show them. And then on the right, that's just Medium. If you haven't heard of Medium, it's kind of like Twitter but for blogging. So basically you've got loads of journalists and writers. Some of them are really proficient and really good at their craft, and others are just starting out, and it's basically not really a dumping ground, but it's a platform to kind of share your work. So this was one of those kind of quiz things that I wrote where if you pick A, you're most likely to be something. If you pick B, it was a very creative kind of fun little take on a cricket match, but one which I didn't really think there would be a platform for. So I just made my own platform, and there's nothing to stop you doing that. So how do you improve your writing when you get to that stage? And I would always suggest that you expose yourself to great journalism. So we've all got our journalism heroes, and we all kind of know deep down why we want to do what we want to do, and who in the background has been inspiring us. And so that one on the right there, Seven Deadly Sins, is a brilliant kind of personal first-hand take of David Walsh, who was Sunday Times journalist, and for years he was pursuing Lance Armstrong, and some of Armstrong's former teammates had tipped off to him that he was taking performance-enhancing drugs, and nobody believed him for so long, and then eventually he was proven right. And that book was nominated for a William Hill Sports Book of the Year. So if you ever want to expose yourself to some brilliant sports writing, just search for William Hill Sports Books of the Year. They are the kind of Oscars for sports books. And one of the very first winners was Fever Pitch by Nick Hornby, which is a brilliant kind of first-hand fans take on following Arsenal for a decade. Absolutely brilliant. And then just down the bottom, that's a really good example of some brilliant audio. That's the Hurricane tapes from BBC Sounds. It's about a boxer in the 1960s that was battling for the heavyweight championship of the world one month, and then the next he was kind of arrested for a murder, and it's whether he was framed for it or whether he actually did it. Some brilliant journalism, and brilliant journalism is out there, and you can get it for free. The BBC Sport website is free. The Guardian website is free. You can access a lot of content that's behind a paywall that you don't realise yet. For example, the Daily Telegraph's content on women's sport is completely free to access. It's just something that they don't really publish that much, and they really should, in my opinion, because there's some really great stuff out there. So yeah, if you want to improve, the first thing to do is read more, and the second thing to do is write more, and allow yourself to make mistakes, and learn from them and keep improving. So you've kind of written your first kind of articles, and now you're ready to make that next step. Maybe you want to jump towards paid work. So the next thing really to question is how you're going to get noticed. And that kind of first point, it's easy to write an email. It's also very easy to find out email addresses for editors. A lot of sites make their kind of contact us very easy to find, because they want freelancers to be sending them stories and pitching ideas, because they want content on their website. So you just need to find somewhere that you want to write for, and then just have a little search. And if you can't find it in the website, just go back out into Google and search exactly what you're looking for into Google, because Google's now smart enough to have that as its first page. So when I first started, I found the email addresses of all the broadsheets in this country, and just sent the same kind of email, copied and pasted, to a load of different editors. And I got some really great advice. I didn't actually get any work experience from it, but from the advice that I then got, I was then able to get a bit of work out of it. If there's journalists that you particularly like, or maybe you're reading an article and you like the ideas that have kind of been included, scroll back to the top, read the journalist's name, and search that name into Twitter or social media. A lot of journalists have their DMs open on Twitter, so you can ask them a question without them having to follow you back. And you know, ask them for advice. And the one thing I would say when asking a journalist for advice is don't say a general question like, what would you do if you were in my situation? Ask them something specific. If you've spoken to them because you've read an article that you like, talk to them about that article and why they've made a specific decision, because it will really help you move forward. The other thing is, most press officers working at sports clubs around the country will be really happy to deal with you. A lot of people have this idea that all press officers are kind of the officers you'd expect at Manchester United or Liverpool or something, where they're getting so many inquiries that they'll just shut you down. If you work out who your kind of local non-Premier League team is in the EFL, strong chances that you'll be able to find their contact details on the club website or in a club program somewhere, and you'll be able to contact them and basically explain who you are. And there's a very strong chance that if you ask if you can attend games when we're all back to normal post-COVID, you'll probably be allowed to attend, because so little journalists now actually go into the grounds and stadiums. They've got room in the press boxes, and they want to build relationships with local journalists and student journalists as well, because you'll be writing content about the club and well, exposure sells. So that's something to really think about. And when you are in those situations, when you're talking to a journalist, or you're talking to a press officer, or you're at a sports event because you've spoken to the press officer, always sell yourself. You know, a lot of people are very uptight about championing all the things that they've done, but really there's no need to be. We're in a competitive industry. We're all very motivated people, and we love to talk about all the great things that we've done. So there's really no problem kind of selling yourself. And then use your network. So some of you guys will be very lucky that you might have a family friend who happens to be a journalist. So really rely on that and build off it. Some of you might be halfway through a university degree, so you've got lecturers that should hopefully be professional journalists as well. Build on those kind of contacts. And when you are in that kind of situation, make it your mission to kind of introduce yourself to somebody new. So what I mean by that is, if you are speaking to this family friend that's a journalist and they mention somebody else, there is no harm in asking, oh, do you think you could organise a phone call between the two of us? I've got lots of questions that I'd like to ask. It's just kind of developing and absorbing as much advice as you possibly can. And then when your network is wide enough, you can jump on those opportunities, because most kind of hiring in journalism actually comes through the back door, really. So once you're in there, how do you make it stick? So a little bit about me. I was very lucky to get myself on a BBC internship. It was called the Kickoff Training Sports Reporter Program. It's having a little break because of COVID-19, but I'm sure in 2022 it'll come back really strong. So I applied for that, managed to get on into the team in Birmingham. But just because you're in there doing work experience, it might not necessarily stick. So you've got to really make yourself appear as passionate and as knowledgeable as you can. So what I would do would be, during quiet moments when I'd have nothing to do, I would go up to my mentor and ask to do more work, ask to help, because I wanted to put my name to as many articles as possible, and to make myself really a part of the furniture. And that's the next point. Make yourself as part of the team. If it's appropriate, you know, contribute to the office banter. This is really a team game, journalism. You're going to be reporting to a line manager. You're going to be working alongside other journalists. You're going to be sharing contacts. You really want to make yourself appear as friendly to others as possible. and treat other people how you want to be treated. A lot of people get the impression that journalism is just people screaming at each other like it was in a kind of 70s newsroom. It's really not like that. If you're in a newsroom where people are panicking and screaming and shouting, that tells me it's not very well run and it's not very well organized. Instead, it's a relaxed environment, but it is a professional one where teamwork is really key. Asking about medium and long-term projects was really a great way to stand out. It means that you kind of appreciate the ongoing news cycle, and if you're there only for a week, but you start asking them, whether you can contribute to a sports event that's actually happening 2 months away, you might end up getting some freelance opportunities when that time comes. Request feedback. That's self-explanatory. That's how you improve as a journalist. And the final one is there's no shame in sharing your dream. And what I mean by that is we're all going to have really little things that we all really want to do in this industry. So I know a lot of people's little things are to report on a World Cup final. But my kind of little thing would be to report on some of the athletic events at the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. I was raised in Birmingham. It's my hometown, and I'd go to the athletic stadium and I'd play hockey on those hockey pitches. And what I really want to do next year is to write about it, to report on it. And it wasn't until I actually talked to people about that and asked to actually put my name down for this to happen next year that people started to sit up and take notice. And if I hadn't have asked, then I wouldn't have been added to the kind of email list for BBC reporters to report on that next year. So I think it's really easy for people when they're doing work experience or when they're talking to other journalists to kind of assume that they already know what your motivations are, and that's really not the case. It might seem really obvious to you that you really love cricket, but I don't know that because I don't know you. So really just make sure that your passions and why you want to do this gets across, because everybody wants to hire somebody that's really passionate and really wants to sell the event that they're covering. Just want to kind of raise a point, which is to not snub freelancing. And I'm just raising it because this is the one thing that I wish I really knew before I started. I'd kind of got it into the mindset growing up that I really wanted to be a sports journalist and that's my job. And then at university, they were all about preparing us to get a full-time job in journalism. And I kind of got caught up with job titles, and I thought unless I was at a staff role full-time, I wasn't a proper journalist, and that's really not the case. Right now, the industry is changing. We're going to talk a tiny bit about the impacts of COVID-19, but it is just worth pointing out that a lot of organisations are facing funding cuts, and a lot of departments, sport especially, are having to see their staff members reduce. So right now, it is really, really hard to get a full-time sports job. But that doesn't mean you can't get a job in the sports industry, especially as a freelancer. And there's loads of benefits to freelancing, especially when you're just starting out in your career. It means that, for instance, if you were freelancing 2 days a week, you could still complete your studies. If you're a freelancer, a company will be more likely to be flexible with you in terms of the location that you work from. And the other thing is part-time very quickly becomes full-time. So I was freelancing out of university, and it took 3 months before I suddenly realized that if I was saying yes to every shift that was offered to me, I'd be working 6-day weeks, and that wouldn't be sustainable. So it's given me this this flexible kind of work-life balance that I really enjoy. And it also gives me a bit of variety. So I currently freelance for the BBC, but I freelance for lots of different departments. So this Saturday I'm going to be writing about rugby. Last Saturday I was writing about cricket. And also freelance for the Sporting Life. So I do a lot of kind of football previews for them. And that's completely different to the match reports that I'll be writing for the BBC. They're completely different styles, but I really like having that variety and not getting stuck um, in the same kind of corner. But I just wanted to mention it because a lot of people go on and on about getting that kind of staff job, but I don't see a lot of love for freelancing, and it's a brilliant way to kind of enter, and it's a lot easier than getting a full-time staff role. And with freelancing as well, if you're not just passionate about sport, but you're also passionate about another subject, maybe politics or travel writing. I know somebody at the BBC that splits their time freelancing for BBC Sport and being a travel writer and getting to jet off to loads of different countries around the world. So it's a great kind of opportunity. So let's just have a quick touch on the impact of COVID, because in case you haven't noticed, it's a really big thing right now. The first one is that audience feelings have shifted. So just to kind of update you with what sells with readers right now, people have kind of gone a little bit off the sensationalism of before. So, you know, the kind of Jadon Sancho transfer dramas, or you know, just those kind of like clickbait titles. They used to work really well. Now they don't really work because people have kind of reevaluated over the last 2 years. Suddenly, your football team not signing a defender isn't the end of the world, because people's meaning of the end of the world has kind of changed. So right now, if you were pitching stories, I would say that there's a huge inkling for considered kind of slow burner, longer form pieces. We've realized that actually over lockdown, people have really gained a new appreciation and form of patience. So that's why podcasts are doing so well, because you follow a story for 6 hours and it's just you listening. And it's the same with longer kind of stories. So now on the BBC Sport website, they've got their whole kind of section at the bottom. I think they call it Sport Insight, which is all about stories that are 3,000, 4,000 words long. You know, and I'd like to think that's kind of a happy thing. I get more motivation writing those really considered features than I do when I get asked to kind of write a clickbaity story. But yeah, just when you're pitching, there's a real appreciation for longer form stories. I will say though that right now budgets are very tight. So you know, don't worry if people aren't getting back to you immediately. When they do say, unfortunately, we're not commissioning any stories, that's genuine, and don't take that personally. It just means in a month's time, remind them again and see the situation they are at the moment. But because budgets are tight and staff are being cut at some places, it does actually mean that ironically there are more opportunities for freelancers to cover those gaps. So budgets are tight, but there are more freelancing opportunities. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but just believe me on that one. Remote working is being embraced. You guys know that already. I mean, we're doing a meeting here on Zoom, but it just means that if you feel like you've got to move to Manchester because that's a sports capital, or you've got to move to London, I just waited out 3 or 4 months because I really think things are changing. And the other thing is there's a really busy live sports schedule, and there's going to be a really busy one next year as well. I mean, this summer we've got the Euros, which will finish, then go straight into the Olympics, and we've also got Wimbledon still to come, and all these great events. Next year we're going to have the Commonwealth Games and the World Cup, and yeah, it's really a really packed schedule. So there'll be plenty of opportunities out there. What I will say is that it's always worth looking 3-4 months ahead in the calendar. So if you were really into your cycling and you wanted to pitch a Tour de France story to Cycling Weekly, do that now. Do that tomorrow, because you won't be able to do it next week when the Tour de France starts. So yeah, just get ahead of the game, and there are plenty of opportunities out there, even with COVID, and thankfully things are starting to open up, and even more opportunities will open up with them. So just to kind of finish before questions, I don't know if you guys have been on any PressPad masterclasses before. They're absolutely brilliant. This is the very first sports one that the guys are doing, but there's loads out there, and they're kind of like their speakers to finish with a quote. So I thought I'd finish with the most famous sports quote out there. Michael Jordan, "You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take," and that's a real relevant one to this talk, because you've got to sell yourself, guys. I have no idea, as if I was an editor, I have no idea who you are, what your passions are, what you really enjoy, and what you've done before. So when you send me an email to ask me for some advice, or if you're pitching a story to me, or if you're asking for a job and some work, they're the things I really want to know from you. I want to know who you are, why you really want this and want to be in this industry, and then I want to see some evidence of what you've done. But I want to see it, and unless you email me or send me a message somewhere, I won't see it. So there are plenty of opportunities out there, guys, and it's a brilliant industry to get into. So I'd really encourage you guys to follow it. Right, I think. Oh yeah, and this is me on social media. I should really tweet more often. That's another one. Social media is your friend, and there are some great opportunities on social media as well, which I'm sure you're aware of anyway. Right, I think I'll hand back the organising to Camille, and I think we're okay for some questions.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, I don't know if I haven't received any questions yet, so if you have any, just let me know in the box. But my first question is, could you explain a bit more on whether we should really go for niche sports or not, and what would you understand by niche sport? Is that a good thing to do? And if so, do you have any examples of success stories on that?
Yeah, it's a great thing to jump on. I think it is quite useful if you have a kind of general sport knowledge. So if you're somebody who's great at a sport pub quiz, then that is really useful, and use that. But more and more kind of websites are looking for people with knowledge on individual sports, or maybe even individual clubs within that. And that's just because the internet is so huge, and we've got access to niche things. But I've seen so many success stories. So I worked with a staff writer at the BBC, and about 3 or 4 years before I'd joined his department, he'd noticed that nobody at the BBC was really reporting on women's sport, and he knew that it was something that we were really going to start to champion, but there was no kind of de facto women's sport expert out there. So he made it his mission to kind of contact as many clubs as possible, and to really grow his circle and niche. And suddenly he was the expert, and when people needed advice, they came through him. And he's recently got a job working for the Daily Telegraph as their women's sport editor. So essentially, he's gone from a journalism reporter to an editor role, and he's getting to do loads of fantastic opportunities. He's going to Women's World Cups. He's going to Olympics, and yeah, there's some brilliant opportunities by going niche and becoming that kind of expert or go-to guy in that field. So yeah, I would jump on it. But even if you're stuck and you don't even know what your favorite sport is, you've got so many, that there's no shame in
Okay, no.
being the person that's got
being a croquet reporter. That
Yeah.
might be the niche I'll go for. We've got a couple of questions on, so from Joshua, who's been saying, I've been struggling to find some work experience this summer. I have posted a few articles on my own blog. What do you think I should do? And a follow-up question, what's the best advice you could give to any aspiring sports journalist?
And feel free to keep on typing a reply, Joshua. So the question I would say is, this kind of portfolio that you've built, how are you kind of advertising that? Are you using social media regularly to kind of share that? Have you found some names of journalists that you'd want to get in touch with, and have you found their kind of contact details and started to send things over yet? Would be my question, because that's the great place to start, because these blogs and platforms are brilliant, but their SEO, their search engine optimization isn't great. Share blogs on Twitter. Haven't sent things to anyone yet. That's a great place to start. Definitely. And the other thing is you don't have to find the editor. I've accidentally bumped into journalists that are kind of on the bottom rung, but have been really great and have given me the contact details of their line manager. So yeah, I would find journalists that you like the look of, and try and find the best way to contact them, and then also find websites that are kind of that next level up, and they might have a contact page. And the final one is to add yourself into Facebook groups like Young Journalist Community, and I think there's some really good subreddits as well, and they're kind of like these. There's quite a lot of spam in there, but if you search hard enough, you'll find some answers to some great questions about who's the best person to contact if I want my piece published at the Guardian or the Independent, or things like that.
I think one of the things as well that you've done, it was on the National Student, but it could have been any other platform, is just pick a sport or two sports and just write, reports, and try and learn from what you see out there and see how you can learn from what is already existing. I remember editing your or your writers' sports reports, match reports, and that was really helpful, and you could see the progress of someone when they started and didn't know very much about the sport to when, you know, a few months in, they actually were getting a bit more confident. United fan. So there are definitely ways that you can learn by yourself as well, by just basically even picking, you know, a mentor, by just reading their piece and seeing how you can deconstruct their articles and replicate that yourself, and learn this way. I think in any field that is really helpful, but in sports journalism, you've got so much new content that is in a similar format all the time that it actually, I think, is quite a good one to try on your site too. And if you put it on your blog, it's not lost. You can build that up as your portfolio or a medium, and then continue sharing it. But that is definitely a good advice there, I think, Joe, on terms of finding this niche Reddit that are just lost. Could you talk a bit about shift work when you're in as a sport journalist? What does that mean? What do you do when you're on shift, and how long are they, and that sort of thing? I think that's something nobody really talks about.
Yeah. So the first kind of caveat on top of that is it really depends who you're working for. But for the BBC and kind of similar for a big organization, you'll probably be doing an 8-hour shift. But what's key is that sport, it's live, and the timings for sport are deliberate so that they're shown when people aren't at work. So Saturdays, Sundays, midweek evenings. So the big thing, which you guys will already know if you've even started to think about sports journalism, is that you're going to lose your weekends, and that's the kind of sacrifice that you have to make to kind of have your dream job. So with the BBC, your kind of shift work will get kind of divided into 2 categories. So you'll either work a news shift, so you'll still be working for BBC Sport, but you'll be covering sport news. Buffon joining Parma today, that would be something that's covered by the news team, and they'll have 10 actually probably not that high anymore, but they'll have 5 or 6 writers as like day staffers, and somebody will be on the 7 till 3, maybe 2 people are on 9 to 5, one person's on 3 to 11, and then one sad person's on overnight, and their job will be to monitor sport news, and that would kind of be a news shift. And then a live shift would be to help work on live sport, and the BBC do reports for every game, and for key matches there's a live text, and I know on a lot of the live texts there's just one name on it, but actually there is a whole team in the background. So there's a producer who's checking everything. There's kind of like a media monitor who's the person that reads everybody's tweets and texts that come in, and he's the one that pastes it into the article. There's somebody else that's adding pictures. So there's a load of jobs, but you're either in the world of sport, you're either writing about sports news or you're writing about live sport, but those 2 skills are definitely kind of transferable, and if you're good at one, you'll be good at the other.
Do you think that's a good place for someone, you know, like Joshua, who mentioned earlier, who wants to find a new like a work experience or something? Is that something that people would be able to enter as young writers and new writers?
So live sport is live, and you know, it'll be harder to get work experience working in live sport, just because it's a bit more kind of full on. Having said that, when I was at university, a lot of people got work experience with the Manchester Evening News, and they just sent them away to report on matches. And they kind of did a sink or swim approach, and everybody swam, and you get better with experience and stuff. As I said when at the start, if you wanted to improve your writing when writing features or profiles, you should read other people's work and then start writing yourself. There's absolutely no harm in watching a football match and pretending that you're going to be writing the match report for it. And actually, that's what I did. I turned up to my BBC internship interview with a load of match reports that I'd written for like my five-a-side football team, because they knew I was really into sports journalism. So that was kind of like my thing. And then like at the end of the season, we could read back everything that we'd written. So they were quite like funny, tongue in cheek, but they were, you know, they had the same kind of structure that you would have in a match report. And I turned up to my BBC interview and said, well, I don't have much example of work, but this is the examples that I do have. And they were just really impressed that I'd kind of identified that a big part of their content, and a big part of any sports paper's content, is their reports on live sport. They were really impressed that I'd identified it and tried to replicate it. So yeah, I would, if you could, and if you had the time, watch a match at the Euros, or not even watch the full match, just watch the highlights and try and test yourself and see if you can see if you could sum up the entire game in 6 sentences. And that will really kind of test your skills and get you really sharpening up your copy and making it as impactful as you possibly can.
And you touched on that a bit earlier, but what would you say, maybe apart from the weekend work and the evening work, would be a drawback that you found that you really didn't expect from working in sports journalism?
There's really not too many. So you know, I said I was a Man United fan. There's been a couple of times where I've been paid to watch my football team lose, and then being paid to write the 800-word analysis on everything that they did wrong, and you kind of feel a bit detached. There are moments where I've come home from a very long shift, and the last thing I want to do is talk about sport. But all of my friends are also really into sport, and it's kind of like our icebreaker. It's our one thing in common that we talk about, and you kind of have to kind of like distance yourself from those conversations so you don't get too burnt out. But yeah, that's quite a negative, covering Man United against Villarreal for the Sporting Life, and being the one person on the late shift, and your boss is a really big Leeds fan, and yeah, everybody's rubbing it in. So yeah, Josh has just sent in a chat saying that must have hurt, and it did.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. I can't see any other questions, so I'll just move on to the housekeeping in the end. Just put a link to a feedback form for the participants so that we can get some feedback on this session today. If you've liked it, please let us know. On here, there's only one way for us to know, is if you tell us. And if you want to learn more about what we do, next week we have a commissioning workshop, and that would probably be interesting for anyone who's been commenting that they're struggling to get work experience. If you look on our Eventbrite page, you can find a link to the commissioning workshop. The only thing we're asking our participants is to send a 30-second video. It doesn't have to be high tech or anything. It's just you talking through an idea of an article. And then we help 3 of the participants to craft their pitch live on, it's not broadcasted anywhere, it's just on Zoom, and it stays private. But we can just help you craft the perfect pitch, with a commissioning editor. So if you're interested, I would really strongly advise that you do that. There's only going to be a few of them. It's every 2 weeks, and they fill up quite quickly. So we still have some spots. So please go and find out more on our Eventbrite page. If you're interested in talking about representation in the news, we have an IGTV, IG Live on Wednesday at 12. And Laura, who's our community manager, will be talking to Josh Milton. And next week, we have Laura, I'm talking to Laura England, who's now a community manager, and she's going to be talking about personal branding and how she built her own business and the importance of your persona online. So do join us again. That will be on our Eventbrite page. So thank you very much. I really hope you've enjoyed it. It was a small committee today, but we'll put all of it on YouTube. And you'll be able to rewatch everything. If you want to connect with each other, do put your details in the chat box right now, and we'll make sure that these connections are made as well. Thank you so much for everything, and that's it. That's us for tonight.